evening, everyone. Live from Efrat. We are continuing our shiur of Zera Shimshon. Zera Hashem, the merit and the zchut of the learning of the Zera Shimshon will continue to bless all of us. Many people following last week's Yeshua that I mentioned several times. We want to continue the bracha of the Zera Shimshon is that everyone who learns his Torah, that continues to extend and expand those people, the learning of the Zera Shimshon, will see bracha in many different ways. So Be'ezrat Hashem, we will all see personal simcha, national simcha, and hatzlacha in everything that we do. So we are doing Jerush Yud, the 10th Jerush of Parshat Korach, in somewhat different fashion to what the Zera Shimshon generally chooses. We're going to choose. In this case, we're going to learn about the midah, the trait, the virtue of zrizut, of working quickly. Just to open up with like a bit of a story, when a parent tells their child to, clean their room. So if the first time the parent asks, he says clean his room, the son or the child will probably not do it so quickly. And they'll probably do it out of just because someone's forcing him. The second time, if the parent would tell him, finish cleaning your room, and then because when you're done cleaning your room, we'll go to the water park or we'll go to ice cream or whatever. Then all of a sudden, the motivation is different. Same thing, same request, clean your room, but the motivation is different. Similarly, if the parent were to, there's a bright, shiny new bike on the street next to the entrance of their house, of their parents' house, the father says, take this bike up. So the son thinks that, or the child thinks that the bike is for them, so he'll run and take it up. He'll take it up the stairs, and he'll make sure that it gets done, and he thinks that the bike is for him. But if the father were to say, take the bike, run the bike upstairs, and give it to our neighbors who will live across the way, the child's response will be a little bit different. It'll probably not as fast, and he'll probably do it slowly, and he won't do it excitingly. And so that's really the kind of similar midah of zrizut, of working quickly, working intentionally, but working with a passion, working with a drive. So this these kind of stories relate to what happens in this week's Parsha, and really towards the end of this week's Parsha, but we'll just kind of give a quick recap of what happens in the Parsha so that we understand. Korach challenges Moshe for the position of the Kohen Gadol, or position of leadership. And after the showdown between Moshe and Korach and the 250 people, 250 Gedolim, Nisim, Hashem opens up the mouth, or the ground opens up and swallows up the 250 tribes, and Korach opens them up alive. And then there's basically as soon as the people are killed and wiped out, the Jewish people challenge Moshe and say, you just killed all these people. Like it seems like they didn't even learn the lesson. The whole lesson was that they shouldn't challenge Hashem and challenge Moshe. But instead, as soon as the part of the Parsha that talks about the entire challenge, as soon as that's done, Bnei Israel come back to Moshe and say, you killed all our people. You didn't have to, Moshe. So, and in punishment of that, Hashem brings a Magifah. And during that Magifah, during that plague, Moshe tells Aaron, and this is really like a big part of the story, is Aaron stands in the middle of the Magifah, and Moshe tells Aaron, go bring Ketoret, go bring a sacrifice of Ketoret, and we'll stop the Magifah. And at that point, this point here, this is where we pick up the Zera Shimshon. The Zera Shimshon picks up on a very interesting point that many people don't necessarily notice when reading the Psukim, because we think we're just so used to not necessarily looking at it from this perspective. And with that, it starts. In this week's Parsha, around, I believe it's the fourth Aliyah, it says, fourth Aliyah, it says, V'holech mehira el ha'edah v'chaper alehem. It says, go quickly to give the korban offering, the Torah offering, that way you can atone, you can do kapara for their mistake. So it says, the Zera Shimshon says, Afal Pisha B'lav Hachi Aaron Hayam Yisrael Latzil Yisrael Im Kol Zer Atzad Moshe Lomar V'holech Mehira. So the question is, why do the Psukim say V'holech Mehira means go quickly? Of course we would expect nothing else from Aaron HaKohen to read quick, to do the actions quickly, right? It would be almost unimaginable that Aaron would be doing something slowly. What kind of, Aaron HaKohen, the Kohen Gadol. So it says here, Im Kol Zeh, Moshe had to tell him, wanted to make sure to say to him, Im Kol Zeh Moshe, Ratzah Moshe Lamar, V'holech Mehira. Moshe nevertheless wanted to tell Aaron to make sure that you're doing it quickly. Why? So the point that what the Zera Shimshon is saying is kind of like an introductory point, and from this he will expand. He says is that part of the action, the part of the success of the Ketoret offering is not only the Ketoret offering itself, but it's actually the speed in which the Zrizut, right? The passion with which Aaron HaKohen actually does it. Otherwise, why would the pasuk go out, and why would we hear that it says V'holech Mehira? So now we're going to go to this in this entire Dvar Torah, which is a unique component and a unique aspect of the way Zera Shimshon in general teaches things. He kind of works. In this case, we're going to learn a little bit about the midah of Zrizut, and that sometimes Zrizut could be a good thing, sometimes Zrizut could be less than positive, and sometimes Zrizut doesn't necessarily mean speed, which was what we, in literal translation we call it alacrity, and we can actually explain it to mean like with a passion, with a drive, and sometimes that doesn't mean necessarily to go quickly, but it rather means to be done thoughtfully and deliberately versus doing it quickly. So that's the kind of introduction. And here we go, and he says, so the Zera Shimshon now explains that how Aaron HaKohen's Zrizut actually contributed to the salvation of the Jewish people. So he says, V'hainu, in order for us to understand how Aaron HaKohen's Zrizut contributed to the success or to the stopping the plague, first he has to explain what the entire midah, what the entire character trait of Zrizut is all about. So he starts with V'hainu lefisha adam hu teva notel kal v'kaved. He says that this is the man, a person. He has two ways to approach things. Both, he can either do it very heavily, meaning he does it slowly, it's a burden for him, or light, meaning it's easy for him, he enjoys it. Whenever we do things, we can tell. We often say those things are done. You can taste the love, right? When someone does something passionately, you can really you can sense it, and you can really feel it. Versus when someone does something with a little bit less passion, you feel like it's a burden to them. You can sense it because they're doing it slowly. They're not as interested. They maybe, if we're talking about in Avodah Hashem, which is probably the main focus of where we can see it, they don't do it with a simcha.
בשמחה, תודה רבה.
תודה.
על השולחן.
תודה רבה. תודה להתראות.
שמחת משהו?
לא. תודה, שבת שלום.
שבת שלום, תודה רבה, תזכה למצוות. יש שירים כל לילה בעזרת השם, יש חצות גם.
כל הלילה, כן. Okay, so he says that the point, basically we have two natural tendencies. One is to work with kind of like an excitement, and one is more to work with a heaviness, slow. This is Shu Kaved. But basically we learn that the Rambam writes that man is created in four different elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. And also the Rav Chaim Vital also mentions it, that basically all creations are a combination in some way or another of those four: earth and wind and earth. I think they're opposite. Yes, earth and wind are the opposites of. Fire and wind are the opposites of each other, and earth and water are the opposites of each other. Why? Because fire and water. Fire and wind are not necessarily, they don't have a physical weight, they don't necessarily contain any weight. So earth and water do have some sort of weight, right? You can actually touch it. Versus fire and wind, they're more of like the fire is only hot with the wind that's in there. it's not necessarily something that you don't necessarily touch it. So he says that the where man is born with, created from the ground, which is a heavy kind of physical thing. Right, but he also has within him some sort of element of wind. Right, when we walk, when we say we fly like the wind, or when we do certain things, we feel like we're just kind of, it's very natural to us, so it just flows like the wind. Similarly, so he says that man is made up of both wind and earth, and therefore some things that we do are very smooth flowing, and they just kind of, it's a breeze, literally, and some things are very heavy for us, and therefore because we feel like we're actually weighed down, like dirt. The ruach v'haratzon, a person's spirit, which is connected to his will. Ratzon is not necessarily mean that not only his desire and his will, but it's actually his spirit, meaning his willingness to do something. Davar talui b'machshava v'moach is something that depends on his mindset. Right? When I have a mindset that I want to do something, and I'm focused on it, usually it's much easier for you because you've worked on it and you put effort into it. Versus when something that you're not so interested in doing, you don't put your full mindset into it. You can see that the results are usually right there. And so he says, Asher po'el b'machshava v'moach. He says, Asher po'el sham b'chozek haruach asher b'kro. And it's there that the power of the spirit that is within him operates. But then when he does something that's contrary or opposite of what he actually really wants to do, right? Right? When a person doesn't want to do something, you can sense that even his body feels heavy and kind of burdened by it, and that shows that you're really not interested in doing it. And so therefore, Zera Shimshon so far is just kind of giving us like an overview of how we can identify when a person's really interested in doing something versus when he's not. And then he says, Yan him mibli ruach. Since these limbs, he's talking about when a person doesn't want to do something. When your limbs don't really want to do something, you feel that those limbs are just kind of going through the motions, or they're not even doing it, and they kind of do it with like a, sometimes when you shake someone's hand, you're not necessarily interested in shaking their hand, or when you do something that's not necessarily exciting, you can sense it when you're shaking their hand. You kind of call it, what they used to call a dead fish hand shake. It's kind of like very weak. It's not a very interesting thing. And so he says like this, it's not with right? Therefore the limbs move slowly and sluggishly. But when a person with will agrees to the task that needs to be done, and he really wants to do it, then his spirit, then his ratzon, his desire, his will, then that you can sense that he's excited to do it, he runs to do it, and you can sense that in what's going on. So it was not really. But so far the Zera Shimshon is created, is kind of framed, is that a person's midah of zrizut is usually that we're born. It's a natural will that we have to do certain things, a natural desire, a natural tendency, we'll call it, to do certain things. And when you do those things that are naturally, you're born with it. Those things that come naturally to you, and that you work with, even those things that don't come naturally, but you work hard towards them, and you invest in them. You're so interested in them, then they become easy for you, and you can sense, anyone can sense around you that you're excited to do them, versus the things that you're less excited, you don't run to them, you move slowly, you approach it slowly, etc. And so therefore he says that Aaron is not necessarily, it wasn't necessarily that Aaron's zrizut, v'holech mehira, going back to the pasuk, it's v'holech mehira, so it's holech mehira means go quickly. It wasn't necessarily that you should do it and get it done, but rather do it quickly and with and here he's adding the point that Zera Shimshon is saying is that you should do it with a zrizut, with a passion and desire, because that passion and desire Hashem senses that, and part of that contributed to the success of bringing the Torah. So he says as follows: but Aaron, it says that it was not only Aaron's speed that per se that he was contributed to the success of the bringing the kapara to Am Yisrael. It was also his will, right? That we mentioned that it was not only the speed; it was also the will with which came and accompanied the actual korban and the kapara. That's where it's like what now we're going to go a little bit deeper into understanding what the midah of zrizut is and what the Zera Shimshon does, similar to all other times in the different divrei Torah. The Zera Shimshon is going to do is find places in Tanakh in which the whole midah zrizut is used, and how we can use it, what we can learn from each one of them. So he says, "Lachen amar lo holech mehirab bizrizut." This is why Moshe said to Aaron, "Go quickly." It doesn't mean literally go quickly, just run and do it. It means do it with the zrizut, do it with the passion, desire that you want to do it. He says is, with your goodwill, bring the Torah that so it will for surely bring atonement for Am Yisrael. What he's saying is that why was so that now what Zera Shimshon is going to do is that he's going to bring some psukim that indicate that Moshe was certain that that Aaron's goodwill, meaning it was the zrizut, the passion for which he goes. Usually translates zrizut as speed. Zrizut here means more of a passion and a desire to do it, and that is what actually contributed, not necessarily zrizut as we understand as speed.
Can I add in something? I've been thinking about it a lot this week because someone translated Korach as Kerach, like ice.
Right.
One of the Chassidish Sfarim, and the idea that he cooled down the chamimus, the eish,
right,
the fire, the warmth, and that was the opposite of what we're learning here.
Right.
Like Aaron the Cohen was warm and so it fit in terms of he was chassid that chamimus that Aaron the Cohen had.
Correct. So exactly. So here he's saying is that we need, in order to kind of counterbalance what Korach's whole thing was, which was to cool down the level, the fire of Moshe and Aaron, the leadership that Hashem gave. He cooled the Korach from Hashem Kerach, which means ice, to cool it down. Then he's saying is that the opposite needs to be done in order to counterbalance that with the Magifah, the plague that happens right after. Right. So basically, what happened is Korach, in some ways, kind of sparked a sense of rebellion. Right. Not only a rebellion by him, but also it kind of sparked a whole idea that maybe someone else should start up a rebellion, and that's exactly what happens as soon as the Korach story finishes in the Chumash. We learn about this other thing where Bnei Israel are accusing Moshe, saying is, "Hey, you just killed 250 people. What are you doing?" So he cools down. They cool it down. So he now goes and says exactly. So he says the zrizut and the passion, the desire, there's the fire with which someone does something, which is what Aaron HaKohen had to do. That counterbalances the cooling down of which allowed Bnei Israel to even consider kind of challenging Moshe. So now he says like this. So he says, where it's no question Aaron was, feared Hashem, had Zera Shimshon. Dichtiv ki siftei chohen yishmeru dat, briti hayta ito v'etnado mora v'yiraini. So Aaron says, if you look in the Psukim in Malachi, and it says ki siftei chohen yishmeru dat, right? The lips of the Kohen should safeguard knowledge. And then earlier the verse, now there's an earlier pasuk, it says that the briti was with him, meaning life and peace I gave to Aaron HaKohen for the sake of his fear for which he feared me. And basically what these two psukim in Malachi, the Zera Shimshon is proving that Aaron HaKohen was for sure Yerei Shamayim, which we would have never even questioned because he was the Kohen Gadol, but at least he's bringing another support for it. And now he says, the pasuk that we know from Ashrei, it says, "Ritzon Yerav Yaseh," right? The will of Hashem we will do, right? Therefore, Moshe said to Hashem, if you go with zrizut, yenodash or tzonchal atzot Yisrael, right? If you go with a passion and desire to really go in there and do it, right, and get it done, then Bnei Israel will say, oh, he did it. It's the passion and this drive to make it succeed was really what caused the kapara to happen, the atonement to happen. Right? And therefore you will for surely save Bnei Israel because Hashem wants to see that person really wants to do the mitzvah, really wants to do what needs to get done, and not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but rather doing it with a real ratzon, a real desire, and it was rizut. Now what happens is now that we've kind of covered or kind of discussed the idea of Zrizut and Aaron HaKohen. Now we're going to learn about two or three cases in the Tanakh, and we're going to see that sometimes Zrizut is a good thing, and sometimes Zrizut is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes we have to view Zrizut as a passion and a desire and a willingness to take our time. Right? You would think that Zrizut means the opposite of taking your time, but in some cases it actually means to take our time to really think things through. And sometimes you might even say that Zrizut doesn't necessarily mean to do it quickly, but it means actually to do something consistently and to do it with a lot of passion throughout the time. So here we go, and now the next part of the same Drush. It says, so he says, now we're going to go through the various sources, a few sources, and comparing and contrasting a few stories or episodes from Tanakh. And he says, the first situation is when Shmuel appoints Shaul HaMelech as the first act as king. Shmuel appoints Shaul, the first king of Am Yisrael, and Shaul is told by Shmuel to do what? He's told him to go back to Gilgal, and he tells him, wait 7 days. Shmuel tells Shaul, go wait 7 days. And and then after those 7 days, then you'll come back. I'll call for you, that is Shmuel will call for Shaul, and then you'll start bringing the public offerings, the public korbanot, and that will kind of be the official sign that you are the king. And instead, what happens is Shaul, however, does not wait. He doesn't take his time. He doesn't take his kind of his. He doesn't. He can't. He's so excited to be king that he stops in the middle, and he brings after. He doesn't wait the full 7 days, but he couldn't wait because he was so excited, and therefore he gets punished. And what's his punishment? Punishment is that he doesn't become his family. The dynasty stops after Shaul. And now he goes. It says now we can understand this whole idea of zrizut, that sometimes zrizut doesn't mean speed, but rather means thoughtfulness, careful, being deliberate, understanding what's the context, etc. He says, when we look there, it says you should wait. Shmuel tells Shaul, wait 7 days, and he says, then I will come and pick you up. Right? That's what Shmuel tells Shaul. He says, go, I'll wait 7 days, and then I'll come and call you. And it says, how could it be that Shmuel could test Shaul and say to him, take your time, wait. This guy was the first king of Am Yisrael, and he's telling him, he says, the first thing you have to do, wait. Right? That's a great question. Again, kind of very stylistic of the Zera Shimshon is that he asks these questions that we didn't think about before. And then he says,
do you think he did like in Israeli, like Rega?
Yeah, right. He says exactly, you want the job? No problem, now wait 7 days. Right? So usually when you have a job, the first thing you want to do is you want to make an impact. So you just rush. And he's saying, no, now you need to wait. Take your step back.
In a way, that's true zrizis, because it's controlled,
right?
It's
So
directed.
Exactly. So he's going to compare this to another story of David and Melech, and we'll see how they're very similar in terms of their personalities, but very important. The difference is a very important difference. So he says here, in fact, for not procrastinating. Right? In other words, he was punished for not taking his time. What happened? Instead of waiting the full 7 days, Shaul goes in and takes a few days, and then he says, I can't take it anymore, brings the car, jumps up to Shmuel, and he says, okay, you're going to get punished. So how could it be that he got punished for it? Not only did Shmuel test him, but in fact he gets punished. Right? We have a pasuk in Mishlei, and it says, have you seen a person who works with rizut? Right? Chazita, meaning you saw ish mahir, a person who works quickly. A person, what happens? What happens when how is a person to be successful? He gets a lot of things done, right? And then the person reads, have you ever seen a person who stands, who's fast? He's the person who gets the job done quickly, he's the one who sits in front of the king. So how could it be? Right? We see from this pasuk in Mishlei that a king should be quick, and he should work things out quickly. If so, what did we just understand? That disproves what Shmuel was challenging Shaul about. Shaul, the first king, should have worked quickly. He wants to work quickly. So of course we should reward him, not punish him. He says also, without even the psukim, logic would state a person who's like the level of a king, who has such a role of leadership, he needs to get a lot of things done. That's how you're going to test him. You're going to test him if he gets things done. Right? You're not going to test him based on if he's just a good-looking person. You want him to get things done. That's every leader. Right? The people want to see the leader that they're getting things done. And if you're not working, so that's also logical. So he says, how could it be that Shmuel was testing Shaul with the one trait, which is the opposite of what we would understand as being the king, the quality, the characteristic the trait should have, that a king should have. So now, that's putting that question, let's hold off on that question for a second and answering that question. And now the Zera Shimshon brings another case of another king, which is another king. The next king is David HaMelech. And in this case, we talk about a case in which it says there are two incidents in which David HaMelech fought the Plishtim. Right, and in both in which the Plishtim, it's actually in which the Plishtim tried to attack David HaMelech and Am Yisrael. And in each case, David asks Hashem for insight as to what to do. And in one case, Hashem gives him one answer, and in one case, Hashem gives him the opposite answer. And that's exactly where the Zera Shimshon picks up. And he says, in the second, the Zera Shimshon works backwards, and he says the second situation, in the second incident of the Plishtim, it says here, "V'yoter kashesh matzino shakadosh baruch hu va'atzmo nisal David baruch b'derech hazeh." Now, even more so, besides Shmuel testing Shaul, here we have Hashem, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, testing David HaMelech. And he says here, in the second case, it says, "Dichtiv lo ta'aleh hasev alecharehem v'hi chishamacha et kol hatza'ada b'roshei abechaim as techaratz." Hashem says, don't go directly, don't attack the Plishtim straight on, but rather go around the bushes. And when you hear the bushes, kind of rattling, and you hear the tree, the sound of the stomping, then that's when you know you go. And what is it? What are we trying to learn from here? He says here, it's a sign that Hashem is basically telling him that take your time. Meaning, I don't want you to go straight at the attack. I don't want you to just go straight on an attack. In this case, this is the second case of the Plishtim. In this case, I want you to do is go take your time. And he says, wait for the sign. So in this case, why did Hashem want David to kind of stall the attack? Right? And only after waiting, then Hashem says, okay, you've waited. Once I tell you to wait and you've got the sign, then you can go out and attack. But you would think that in a case of a ode, and he said in this case, or a case of a war, you would think that the faster the attack, you get it done, move on. Right? We also have to understand a little bit, we have to look at the difference between what Shaul and David in terms of their Shaul was tested with the whole idea of procrastinating, the idea of zrizut, or the opposite of zrizut, at the beginning of when he was just became king, literally the first thing. David was not tested until he was already waged in one battle already, meaning because there were two battles with the Plishtim. The first time Hashem tells David HaMelech asks Hashem says, yes, go ahead and do it. And the second time Hashem says, no, wait, go around the bush, wait for the sign, and then you can go. And tells him basically the opposite is true, tells him to wait. So here you see is that David was tested in the second time, meaning that David was tested in, it wasn't his first thing as a king. And in the case of Shaul, it was literally the first thing that he did as the king. So he says, ששאול הקדוש ברוך הוא עלה על פלישתים ודוד לא נסע עד שעשה מלחמה אחת וניצחה ששאול הקדוש ברוך הוא עלה על פלישתים התיתן בידי. He says, the first time he says, David asks Hashem, should I go up against the Plishtim? Will you give them to me in my hand? Will you deliver them to me in my hand? ויאמר Hashem על דוד, עלה כי נתון נתן את הפלישתים. Yes, of course I will go up. ויבוא דוד בבעל הפרצים ויקם שם דוד. In the first case, in that case, which is the first story of the Plishtim, David HaMelech asks Hashem, he says, should I go? Will you give the Plishtim into my hand? And he says, yes, you should do it, go ahead and do it. Right? As opposed to the second case, which is when Hashem tells him to wait a little bit. Even when in the second case, when the Plishtim continue to kind of attack, then it says, Hasev then he says, don't go directly up and attack them, which is what he told them in the first case. Rather, he says, wait patiently, wait for the sign, and then go. So what do we have here is that we have that in two cases, in both cases, David and Shaul were told to take their time, right? Remember, case number one is Shmuel tells Shaul, wait a week. And in case number two, David is told by Hashem, he tells him in the second war against the Plishtim, he's told, wait, go around them. Yes, I will give them to you, but you have to do it slowly, right? So he says here. So what do we learn here? That basically we have this midah of patience, right? And that it's not necessarily speed, right? As a king, you would think that you want the thing to be working quickly. In the case, it's not necessarily true. V'yesh lomar, we can now explain. Shamru zichronam libracha b'masechet Yoma. We learned that in Masechet Yoma daf kaf bet amud bet. It says ben shana Shaul b'malcho. That Shaul was a year old when he reigned. It doesn't necessarily mean literally he was 1 year old, but rather in terms of his sin, the amount of purity that he was. Kiven shana shelo tam chet. He was very pure, and he had not tasted sin yet. Uvesofa sota amrina, and at the end of sota it says, Zrizut mivia l'denekiyut. Zrizut leads to cleanliness, right? I mean that the more you work with a passion and desire, the more focused you are, and therefore you're less prone to doing things that are not so clean. And it says ufarshum shama mifarshim. If you look in the mifarshim and the end of Masechet Sotah, it says here, meaning that cleanliness refers to free of sin. Shaul shayalo nekiyut, because Shaul was such a clean person based on the proof that we just brought from Yoma, from the Sechet Yoma. Vadai shayalo zrizut hakodem elav b'agdara. Hakodem elav b'agdara. Of course, Shaul, with his purity in action, he had the zrizut. He had the zrizut that comes with being preceding a cleanliness, right? Which is the level precedes cleanliness. Lachen did not need, Shaul didn't need to be encouraged to act with speed. Adraba, in fact, what was Shmuel trying to teach him is saying sometimes zrizut means you have to understand the situation. You have to take things a little bit slowly, right? Because Shaul was so pure, and he just did things, quietly. His zrizut was so pure that he didn't realize that sometimes zrizut doesn't necessarily mean speed. It also means focus, being deliberate things intentional about things. So sometimes working with speed, working quickly, it's not the quickness that sometimes is the virtuous act, but rather sometimes it's the will to do what is right that causes that causes someone to act quickly. But even that quick means that sometimes you have to understand and be able to balance and be able to consider all the different options. And when you consider all the different options and you've done things carefully, so that carefulness takes time. When you're careful and you take your time and then you act quickly, that careful act is also a sign of zrizut. It's not a sign. In fact, it's not a sign of atzilut, of laziness, but rather it's a sign of zrizut, that you're thinking things through, and you understand, and you're weighing the various appropriate actions. So now Korach tiv al tatzei l'rav maher. Indeed, if we look at that same, if we look at this pasuk, it says, "Do not enter quickly into lariv maher." Al tatzei lariv maher. Don't go quickly into a fight. Right? When we look at fights, and in fact, in general, when quarrels, altercations, we look at them. Most of the time, what happens is when someone gets heated, what happens? You say something quickly, you don't mean it, or you say something out of, knee-jerk reaction or something like that. And he says, the quote of Mishlei says, "Al tetzei lariv meher." Don't be quick to enter into a fight or quarrel. And then it says later on in Mishlei, in Kohelet, it says, "Milchama ve'et shalom." There's a time for peace, a time for war, right? Meaning, what are the psukim here that the Zera Shimshon is trying to teach us? He's trying to tell us that we have to understand what's appropriate at this time versus appropriate at the next time. We don't have to be zrizut. Doesn't mean don't be quick to cause a fight. Think things through. When we think things through, we really understand, and we can really kind of put things into the right place in the right context and know what the appropriate response is. And here it says, Mishum hachi nisau ba'atzlut. This is why Shmuel tested Shaul with a quote unquote a sense of patience, right? And not procrastination. Atzlut. I wouldn't try to translate atzlut as procrastination here, but actually I would try to translate it as patience. Right? Because atzlut.
That's a chiddush.
Right. Atzlut. Sometimes atzlut sounds like laziness. I don't think it's laziness here.
That's how Shlomo Melech, like in Mishlei.
Right. Only in this case. I wouldn't necessarily always, but in the case at sale sometimes means that you're doing it. You're doing it focused and you're taking it carefully. So it's not procrastinating, but I understand the situation. I understand that if I act quickly now, my response will not be as good as if I took a little bit more time. My response will be even better, and it will come out better, and therefore it's not a sense of the zrizut is actually a sign of patience. And so it's certainly atzlut. So it says here, mishum hachi nisau v'atzlut lirot im yesham im shehu shaya kol kach zariz, a person who's so good at, like Shaul HaMelech, who is so good at being swift, quick, doing things quickly. He also knows, Shmuel was testing Shaul to say, can this person who's so good at working things with a pure zrizut, which precedes cleanliness, which was what we proved from the various Gemaras in Masechet Yoma and Masechet Sotah, can this person who is so good at zrizut, can he also know that zrizut sometimes means patience? Right? It means that also sometimes you have to work, and you have to work quickly to say, give me some time. Right? What's the best? How do we know when's the best? When you get angry or when you're about to do something, you say, you know what? Let me sleep on it. When you say let me sleep on it, and then you have more time to focus and think about things through, your response is usually much more thought through and level-headed. Instead of doing something out of passion, meaning heat, out of heat of the moment, you say something, or you say you're going to do something, and then you follow. You miss the follow through.
They say that Reuben lost the whole Bechorah.
Right.
Because of his impulsiveness.
Right, exactly. What is it?
Such a big loss. Where did it go? To Aaron and Cohen.
Right. So what
in terms of the Kahuna.
Right. So in fact, in the brachas of Yaakov Avinu, what does he say? Ruvain b'chori ata, hachaz kamayim. You were fast. You were swift. Yeah. Right. You were swift. Your swift action. Sometimes swift action. Too much. Right. Exactly. So that's exactly what Shaul was being tested for here.
Wow.
Now that we've covered, now that we've understood the story of Shmuel and Shaul, now he's going to go back to the story of David, and he says the same thing with Hashem and David. David had shown that he didn't possess as much as Rizut as Shaul HaMelech. So he says, he was not free of all sin. Right? With Shaul, we just proved that was very pure of sin, and therefore his Rizut was just like unadulterated, really interested, really focused, and really like before cleanliness, before the kiyut, his was rizut. Here, and David, he wasn't as good about it, right? And therefore, he wanted to see. Therefore, Hashem wanted to see his rizut. He wanted to see what would happen. How would he react? How would David respond in the first war? Once he saw that David possessed the ability to ask permission, and once he said yes, go do it, and he did it right away, that shows a sense of zrizut. He showed yes, it's a little bit of he took his time to ask, but then he said yes, go ahead, so he right away. And therefore, he there impressed upon him that sometimes through that test that zrizut is not always good. Right? Sometimes you have to do is you have to be focused, deliberate, intentional. Right? So that's the same thing. In the second test, what happens? Hashem says to him, you want to win this war? Don't go straight on the attack in the second time, but rather he says is go around, wait, patience, and then that was trying to teach David HaMelech that patience is the ability to take your time and then strike. Right? When you strike at the right moment and you wait calmly, then you'll be more successful than if that you just quickly just strike things down right away when it would have happened. And therefore, what happens? Unlike Shaul, David passed the test. Right? Because what happened? In the first time, David was told, David asked Hashem, and Hashem said, go ahead, right away. And the second time, he said, wait patiently and do it. And instead of ignoring what Hashem said, David said, okay, I trust you, Hashem, and he followed the command. And therefore, he waited, and once he waited in that time period, and during that time period, he showed that he trusts Hashem, and therefore he didn't fail the test. And now, we can go back to the pasuk. If we look at the pasukim, it says, have you ever seen a man who works with speed? Right, he stands before a king. He will not stand. The rest of the pasuk says he will not stand in front of men of darkness. So he says, right? A person who stands in front of kings, of course, he's not standing in front of people who are darkness. Right? Right? It seems unnecessary. Part of the darkness, that part of the pasuk of the people standing in front of darkness, is not really it's unnecessary in relation to the rest of the pasuk which preceded it. Right? So he says, it would have been enough. Just reading that pasuk, had the pasuk just read Chazita ish mahir v'lachto lifnei melachim yatzav, had we read the pasuk just that, without the second part, which is the seeing people in the dark, right? The pasuk would have still made sense. So he says here, rather, we learn that a person, that even one who acts swiftly, must weigh his rizut. Meaning, we have to learn how to use his rizut in the right time, at the right place, at the right moment. We have to use it, understand what the circumstance. And his rizut doesn't necessarily mean speak right away, like right away response, but rather it means each time it has to be focused and say, when is my moment of his rizut? His rizut doesn't mean I'm fired up, I'm going to do it right away, right? It means that you do it at the right time, you focus, understand the circumstance, and say, when is my optimal opportunity to act swiftly? When is that opportunity? It's not that I have to do it right away, but rather I have to think about the situation and weigh all the considerations. And once I've weighed all the factors, and me acting swiftly in that one moment, right? What do they say about people who are the best people in a room in a meeting? Right? The people who say very little, and they make one comment, but that comment is so perfectly placed that it's right. So they just listen, right? That's a sign of zrizut. They understand when that moment is. The person who listens.
One of my friends in business who are very successful speak very little, but when they speak, it's worth it.
Right, exactly. So that's the same thing here. He's saying is that a person who takes their zrizut and understands that there's a moment, and that moment is, I take it, I'm listening, I'm focused, I'm intentional. So that one moment when they act, you're just like, wow, okay, they've impressed you because they haven't said much, but when they say something, it's meaningful. And the same thing, that's the sign of zrizut. It's not atzlut. It's not meaning. They're not lazy. The opposite. They're successful business people, but they're taking their time. They're focused on. They're using this zrizut in a channeled way. And he says here, and there now we can understand and look. It says here, Mishum hachi kamashmana. Therefore, that teaches us that misha hu mahir ben lachto, a person who's fast with his work. Right? Only the thing that he needs to do. He's only fast with that one thing. He takes his time. He focuses on that one. In the case of the person in a business meeting, he that one moment, he knows that he's really good at it. So that one moment, he's going to wait for that moment. And that thing that he does it quickly. Right? In his work, that's the work that needs rizut. That's the one that needs speed and passion and desire. But he's not always quick in all the work that he does as a rule. That's the person. The person who's knows his work, knows his role, and he plays his role perfectly. That's the person who's befitting to stand in front of a king. He will not stand before the men of darkness, because what? For even if sometimes he does things slowly, or he takes his time, right? He's not going to stand in front of darkness. Why? He's taking his time. It's not that a sign of atzlut. It's not a sign of laziness. He's not procrastinating in the negative sense of procrastination, but rather he's deliberating. He's focused. He's intentional about his actions. So he's not showing it as saying you're not going to stand. He will not stand before men of darkness. He's not being considered as a lazy person or as a sloper, as a procrastinator, because he's using his rizut in a focused way. So that's the point here, is what the pasuk, the reason why the Zera Shimshon says the whole pasuk makes sense. The person who uses his actions, and when he does his actions quickly, he gets in, he does what he needs to do, and he steps out, right? So he's focused on his actions, and then when it's not his turn, he doesn't start to chime in, he doesn't try to step in, rather he just waits. He takes his time, and therefore he's not going to be considered among the people who see darkness, because he'll never consider someone who's being lazy. In fact, the opposite. His time, his ability to deliberate and to be intentional is not, even though you would think that it's considered the opposite as rizut, that is rizut. His rizut is, I know my time, I know my moment, I know the place, I have to understand the circumstance, and since we have to understand the circumstance and understand all the information, so I'm not being lazy, I'm being deliberate, which in this case is not, and that deliberate can also mean zariz in this regard. So what do we learn so far? So we've learned so far that sometimes a person who holds off on the performance of a mitzvah is appropriate. It's still the midah of azrizut is still there. right? His procrastination is not due to the fact that he doesn't want to do it. It's not that he doesn't want to do the mitzvah. He wants to do the mitzvah in the fullest way. And therefore, when he does the mitzvah with zrizut, he's weighed out the time. I gave an example the other day when I was learning this. A person goes, he can wake up and go to the early minyan at 6 o'clock, let's just say, the 6 o'clock minyan, but he knows he's going to daven quickly because he has to get home to help with the kids and whatever. Or he could say, you know what, at 8 o'clock, after I've gotten the kids out the door and I've done everything I need to do in the morning, I can go to the 8 o'clock minyan and I can daven benachat, right? So then you would think, wait a minute, he's being lazy, he can't go to the 8 o'clock. No, he's using his zrizut focus. He's doing his rizut. His rizut is, I can do everything that needs to get done correctly, so that when I'm doing my shalom bayit, I'm doing the things with my kids with zrizut, I'm doing it correctly, and I'm not doing my davening with zrizut, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing, and therefore his atzlut, which it looks like he's being lazy, he's procrastinating davening instead of davening at 6, which is the first time that you could do it, let's just say, and instead of doing it at 8, which you would say is, okay, he's delaying, he's procrastinating. No, his zrizut is indeed something that he's doing it in time and in the right time. So, but it's the key is here is, how are you doing that mitzvah? When you get the chance to do the mitzvah, when you've said, okay, I've deliberated, I'm going to do this davening at 8 o'clock. Okay, now that I've committed to doing it at 8 o'clock, because I've thought about all the options, how do you do that 8 o'clock davening? Do you do the 8 o'clock davening with mamash, with a passion, and say, then what happens? Hashem says, oh, your real zrizut, that's your zrizut. At 8 o'clock, you get there with zrizut. You really do it. Or you say, well, I missed out at 6 o'clock, so we're going to rush through the 8 o'clock. So he says, that the point here is that it's the spirit, right? What energizes him? At 8 o'clock he says, now I can daven properly, I was able to help at home properly, so now I can really, thank you Hashem for giving me that 8 o'clock minyan. So that 8 o'clock minyan davening is merely the will, his really desire to do it. That's the reason that he comes into that 8 o'clock minyan with. That shows that it's like, okay, so that shows that his whole thought process was really with his reason, it was really with focus, and it's not atzlut. And then he says that a person, that's the spirit, and Hashem wants that. And if we go back to the story of Aaron HaKohen, that's why Moshe tells him, Holech mehirah, do it quickly, because Hashem wants to see that you're so excited to do this the Torah to help stop the Magifah, the plague. So he says, do it with that. And in fact, he says here that it's a sign that a person who doesn't do it with Holech mehirah, the pasuk is telling us Holech mehirah to show us that do it with a desire, because then you're showing that your whole intention from the first moment, was really with a zrizut. And if a person who doesn't do it with zrizut, then you're showing that you really don't really possess that ability, that you don't really possess zrizut in the right way. Now we can go back to a different pasuk in Mishlei that says, Ta'avat atzel timitenu kimi anu yadav lasot. He says, if the desire of a lazy one will kill him, for his hands refuse to work. Now we can understand that using the context of the entire Torah that we just learned. Now we can understand the pasuk in Mishlei. It says, "Damrina v'perkam d'sota." We learn in the first chapter of Sota. It says, "Kol ha'matchil b'mitzvah v'nagom ram moridino tamigdulato v'kover shto v'nav." A person who begins a mitzvah but doesn't complete it, right? He'll be demoted from his prominent position, and Allah Aleinu with other things will not necessarily be very positive. That's why the pasuk. What is the pasuk? And then it says that teaches that atava sheyesh lo mitchila latchil b'mitzvah. He says, what happens? A person has a drive in the beginning to do a mitzvah. He's so excited to do the mitzvah, right? And then he starts the mitzvah. What happens in the middle? Towards the middle, it slows down. Okay, it slows down. That's what's going to kill him, not literally, but figuratively, right? Because Hashem wants to see that you have the passion and you have the desire to start. The moment you start, you're inspired to do a mitzvah. You follow through. You do it from A to Z. And I gave an example the other day when I was teaching. It says, let's say we have a guy comes for a tzedakah at the door, right? So the guy comes to the door, and you say, okay, you know what, I'll give you money in a couple of days. I don't have money right now. I'll give you money in a couple of days, and then you forget about it, and then a couple of days later you totally forgot about it. You say, oh yeah, I'll transfer money on Bit, Paybox, Venmo, whatever, and you don't necessarily, and you kind of push it off. But the moment the mitzvah was there, you had the moment to do it. You should have done it right away. And instead of doing it with zrizut, you kind of took your time, and by taking your time, you're showing what you really wanted to do, what your whole intention. And that's why you killed the whole passion. And therefore, he says it's almost like you kind of killed the whole thing. right? Now, why didn't Hashem help him? Don't we know the Zera Shimshon asked a great question. Don't we know, what does it say? Habal taher v'sayim, right? That's the opposite of what we just said. He says, what happened to that? Right? What happened to that statement where we learn the Gemara that says that if you do something and you start something, Hashem's going to help you finish it? Great question. He says, didn't we learn that principle that a person who starts to do something in the right direction, Hashem gives him an answer? The terus is the pasuk, the remaining part of the pasuk of Mishlei. Kimeanu yadav lasot. The answer itself is in the question. Is this question? It states, for his hands refused to work. Means that it was out of laziness that he refrained from completing the mitzvah. Right? In the case of the guy who comes to the doors for tzedakah, instead of just saying, yes, I want to give you, so here, let me give you the money right now, you kind of say, yeah. And that proves your entire story, your entire mindset was that since you came to the door and it didn't give you right away, your muscles and your hands and your body show what your intentions were from the beginning. Because if you really were interested and you were really passionate, you were really zariz, you would have said yes, let me do it right now. Right? And instead of doing that, that's when Hashem says, yes, I'll help you. When you show your true desire and you work things and you can't get to that last, can't get to the end zone, right? So Hashem pushes you over the line, right? It's not someone who starts at zero and doesn't even show from 0 to 1 that he's trying to push himself, but he gets barely to the halfway mark, and then he's expecting Hashem to help him. No, a person who gets to the 90% mark and he needs that extra 10%, that's when Hashem helps. But in the middle, if you just kind of collapse and you just kind of get overwhelmed or you get burdened by the mitzvah, then Hashem says, well, I'm not going to help you with that because you've just shown me your real intentions. So what have we learned from this case? So the whole story, this whole Torah is really starting from the words v'holech me'ira means work quickly. Moshe was telling him that the pasuk was telling us that that Moshe was telling Aaron that you need to work quickly with the passion, with the zrizut, with a real burning, with a fire in you to do it so that Hashem sees that you really are passionate about the entire thing. We're not, God forbid, are we challenging Aaron's willingness to do things, because that would be the opposite of what Aaron HaKohen is. And then what do we learn? Then we learn. Then the Zera Shimshon goes through the story of David and the story of Shaul, two kings who were challenged. One was challenged by to learn to be patient, and one was challenged to be patient. And at the same time, in another case of the same situation, he was trained to do right away, to be very quick. And the point is that in both cases, the test was to do the opposite of what they're used to, the opposite of their regular trade of zrizut. And to show you that zrizut doesn't necessarily mean swift, it means to be deliberate, so that when you do act, you act swiftly and you're done. You're in, you do what you got to do, and you leave. Right? As opposed to, but up until that point where you're quick, that you're taking your time, you're focused, and that's the lesson, is that your zrizut needs to be done in a deliberate, focused manner. And it doesn't mean that if you take your time, it doesn't mean that you're procrastinating, but rather you're doing the thing, you're doing your whole action is done with a certain sense of passion and desire and zrizut.
Can we make a dedication? Because I
Sure.
just heard news, unfortunately, while we were on live, that my son's unit, there was a tragedy, and one of the boys, unfortunately, I don't think he's with us. We don't know who yet, we don't know details. We know there's a lot of injured, but I do believe my son is okay, thank you Hashem, but still, Bogdan Emes, we should keep davening.
Bezrat Hashem, the zchut of the zrizut, the army in general, and your son's unit in particular, should learn to be zariz in the right way, at the right moment, the right time, to act swiftly, and they also learn to not only things in Gaza, but also in general, they should be successful with everything they do.
Amen.
And Hashem should in that case, Hashem is trying to teach us that we abad taher. We're trying to be mitaher Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. There, Hashem should help them in everything that they do.
Beautiful, thank you.